Greetings and salutations, folks, and welcome once again, as always, to another helping of Mr. H's Hot Pot. You join me today back on my old stomping ground at Westwood, which is in Wigan, and I've done a number of videos on a building that used to stand behind me, which was called Westwood Hall. This is the final chapter of that series of videos. I've been meaning to do this for quite a while, but I haven't got around to it. I'm joined today by a local historian, Andy Lomax, who knows quite a bit about the family who used to reside here. Now, what we're going to be doing, we're going to be taking a little look around, see what remains after the building was demolished, and then we're going to move on to the cemeteries where the people who used to live here, the Kays, are buried. So what we're going to do now, I'm going to lift the camera off in a moment and go and take a look. But you have a big interest in this hall, don't you?
I do, because we don't know when it was built, basically, so we know the story of the Walmsley family who had the estate itself, and then the Kays came along at some point, possibly in the 1830s, to come and live at this part of the estate. But again, and the argument of the last occupant, Carl Lillis, before he passed away, was it's older than we think. And unfortunately, due to the passing of Carl and the dilapidated state of the building, and arsonists, thieves, vandals all went in there. There was a great fire in which it couldn't be retained no longer, and it was demolished. And it's quite sad, because the last time I came, it was still there as a shell, and there's not even a brick or anything, is there?
No, there's
about
nothing
Mr.
there.
H. There's nothing left. So you're basically looking at something that isn't, well, it doesn't have any qualities to look at. You would never think that there was an house possibly hundreds of years old that used to stand here and has its own story with the Kay family.
Now, what I do have, luckily, I managed to get in, and as I say, I did previous videos. I've been in it before somebody set fire to it. I think it got destroyed on the 23rd of April.
You're spot on.
23rd of April, 2023, St. George's Day.
Yeah, you're absolutely spot on, yeah.
Funnily enough, I'd been in literally hours before, and I could swear to it that there was petrol cans around. I think if you go through that video, you'll see petrol cans that have been discarded.
Right, yeah.
I was a little bit, is there somebody still in there? But
yeah.
Anyway, I also went in and I took a look at it when it was just a shell. So, in a roundabout way, this is a nice fitting end to this series of videos, and people can just go through and take a look at it. So, without further ado, let's whip the camera off the stand. We'll go commando a little bit and see what's left, shall we, Andy?
Yeah, let's do it.
Now, by far, Andy, the only real remain on here is this well here. I believe personally it's Victorian, and I certainly know that there used to be a runoff from the house. The house used to just stand over there. I'll try and use some screen grabs from my other film, and you'll be able to see where that used to stand in conjunction to the house. First thing that I noticed is the old well to this house, which is here. It used to be capped, but somebody's opened it up so we can see down it.
Drop your phone.
Yeah, drop it in that. Now, what they used to do with this well, it used to run off here. They used to get all the rainwater off the house, and it used to run in a channel, which I'm presuming is that, the remains of that, and it ran into here. Now, the only thing with it was all lead piping at times. It was all the old lead pipes and the old lead guttering, and that's what they were drinking. That was their water. And when there was a drought, there obviously wasn't much water. So that's a bit of a throwback, isn't it?
It is.
I'm surprised it's not been filled in.
Oh,
I mean, what would it have taken for just used the bucket from a digger, flip that round piece of stone off and just throw some rubble in there?
Yeah.
And it really is, it's an accident waiting to happen, that, because it's quite deep. But
yeah.
We'll take a look, and I'll take a look inside, because you know how you build these things, don't you? You've been told.
Not necessarily the runoffs. I don't know how deep it would be if it's just for sitting water, but technically when they used to actually sink these wells, you'd get somebody working his way down and lining it with brick, and they'll use limestone mortar, which is quite solid. But also you're up against the water from underground as well. That's always coming in, so you're always taking the buckets out. So you're reliant upon the people above the ground to get the water out. There was many a death, unfortunately, sinking these wells, a bit like sinking a coal mine shaft. Yeah. You know, they always had some casualties and stuff. And usually what they would do, they get to the bottom, it's all nice and dry, all ready to go, and they just leave a hole or a gap just in the side, just for all that water to start filling up. So then he had to, I think, possibly a temporary wooden ladder for to get scurry up there and get out of there. But some of these wells, particularly in the Wigan area, are actually quite old, and there's not many left. So it's quite interesting seeing that this one, like you say, it's not been filled in.
No,
and we're not. If it's just a runoff, it's quite an elaborate one, really.
Here's one that's just come to me. Is it possible that they've sunk that there and then eventually thought to themselves, well, we might as well take the water from the house as well?
Yeah, possibly. Yeah.
Top it up, so to speak.
Yeah. Or what says that they were? What says that they weren't drawing water from this in the first place? Or potentially, it's one of those things where I don't think you're ever really gonna
get any
answers to it, are we? So it's
one thing I always found interesting. I mentioned it in my original video when it was being run off from the house. They used to have the old lead gutter ends.
Yeah.
So obviously that water that was running in there had lead in it.
Yeah. Got you.
But then again, they used to have lead pipes, didn't they? So
yeah. So if they're using their own wells and stuff, it means that they weren't plumbed in properly for any services till a later date. So
it probably didn't. Probably didn't have any running water. Anyway, we'll take a look and we'll see as we can look into it as best we can, because it's rather dark in there and neither of us have brought a torch, have we, Andy?
Organised.
Yes, right. We'll do that now. And this is a closer look at this. Now, Andy's just been telling me, as this would have had some kind of pulley system back in the day, and I'm going to theorise that it was probably attached there somewhere. You can see how that's been cut out, can't you, Andy?
Yeah, certainly can. There's something. There's been something.
And here, my theory is, see if I can just demonstrate, is that this is just right for arm size 8. And I think whatever's been here, the pulley system, and they would have drawn it up, or however they drew it up. And that's where they would have always put the foot. That's my theory. Because there's no other reason why that should be hollowed out. And you can see it's not been chiselled out, it's been worn away.
Yeah.
Because although this is a substantial piece of stone, it is soft stone. It's like a sandstone. They'd have to be, because they'll have been cut out by hand, that won't have been drilled.
Which potentially backs up the theory that they were drawing water from this well, potentially. If we've got this cutout over here.
Yeah.
Again, we don't know. We're theorising. They could have been drawing water, and then at a later date, like you say, if they've connected, it's had an attachment up to the guttering, and they've just used it as surface water runoff.
Yeah, or both. It could have been both.
Or both, yeah.
And that's inside it. There is, sadly, as you can see, a lot of rubbish in there. Modern rubbish that's been thrown in there. But it would be amazing to get this off, this piece of stone, and get down there, because I'll guarantee you there'll be bottles and certain things that have been thrown down there.
It'd be interesting to gauge the depth, because they actually go down quite deep, 20, 30 feet, 40 feet. Sometimes that's for the ones to fill the water, to draw it, to give you enough water. If we could gauge the depth at some point and maybe clear this out, that it'll give us a better indication of what it was really used for.
Yeah.
And whether it was a full-on shaft, full well.
And that would be brick lined, would it?
Yes, absolutely, yeah, all the way down. And they probably had a bonding on the inside as well, so later they'd put a water bond on it to stop any seepage and contamination, because at the end of the day you're drawing water and you're drinking it.
Yeah, simply water bond is just bricks that are out of step either side. It's 2 skins and they come halfway in the brick, and that's how you do your water bond. I remember that from my college days. But you said that there's a similar one somewhere else in Wigan, isn't there?
There is. The only other well I've seen but you can actually get into this one. There's one up in between Beechhill and Standish in the fields, and I've crawled into it some years ago when I was a bit lighter and a bit smaller.
Yeah.
And it's quite impressive. It's got a dome roof, and that's
similar to this one. This is
it's a lot bigger, a lot wider. The one up there, and it's got the beams sort of going across. So you got still the beams. It would have been a wooden floor with a pulley system on it. And I was speaking to the country's leading expert on wells some years ago, who told me that of particular interest, when you do go into a well, the door would never open inwards, it would open outwards. Because if there's somebody on the other side drawing water and the door opens inwards, then there's going to be a little bit of trouble.
Who threw him in, little Tommy Flynn type of thing. But yeah, you can see here where there's beams. You can just make out there. Originally, I thought that was some kind of contraption for a lid, but there's one on that side, and I don't know if I can just make it out.
I think you're potentially looking at an attachment for some fixings on the inside.
There's got to have been something to put this up. The original capping, or the capping that somebody's put on it, is there, and all that is, if you just turn that over for me, Andy.
Yeah, it's just concrete.
Well, it's concrete that's gone over on a piece of stone.
Oh yeah.
And then they've just placed that on there. It's not original to this at all.
No.
But it's amazing that that's survived. I thought that would have been one of the first things to go.
Yeah.
Whether or not the demolition people didn't know about it, who knows?
Well, I suppose it's an advertisement to anybody out there on social media and YouTube. You might know a thing or two about these things. We can explain, it's, how they all worked properly and what sort of age we're looking at as well, because it's baffled me somewhat.
Well, it's square inside. It's not been built round.
Yeah.
Traditionally, we always think of wells as being round.
Yeah. It's they'd be round for compression as well, so it would make it, the more weight that bears on it, it makes it sort of stronger, rather than a square. But if it is square in there, then again, it's something we'll have to do some further research on. Right,
now I'll show you the spot where the other wells used to be. But I think those have been filled in since.
Right.
Obviously, when they demolished the house with them being so close, they did do a proper job on that. But we're going to take a look at that now, and then we'll see what other little remains there is. Sadly, as you can see, there's very little here now in the way of it.
It's a shame.
It is really. It really is. Right, we'll make our way over to where the other wells used to be. So, Andy, I guesstimate as it used to be in this area. As you can see with ground, it's been filled in. And what's surprising, you wouldn't know there'd been an house here. Nature's took this over brilliantly.
No time. Yeah.
I'll take the camera off and I'll pan around in a minute, but you can't tell there was an house here. You really can't.
No.
But what it used to be, again, I'll try and put some little screen grabs in. It's lucky I did that film, isn't it?
It is.
He used to have like a little walkway around to his toilet, and that's when you used to pass the wells. Obviously, Carl had running water, so he just capped them off, but they were still there again. Those were brickland and those were square, if I can remember rightly. They weren't round. Westwood Hall used to have a number of wells. I've shown you one round the front. There used to be some round the back as well. And there was just round here. It used to be there. What somebody's done is they've obviously tried to get the Yorkstone flag out of there, probably thinking it was worth something, so they've collapsed it in. Now, as you say, on the old maps, they are marked.
Yes.
But I think it was those. And there is a belief that the smaller part of Westwood Hall was the original Westwood Hall, and they built a bigger part onto it.
Yeah, that makes sense. That does make sense.
If so, why would you travel down there for water? However, when you look at the lie of the land, it is lower, so who knows? Who knows?
Yeah, it's a shame. There's nothing here.
But I'll quickly take the camera off the tripod. I'll show you where the footprint of Westwood Hall used to be, and then we'll see what other remains. There's only really the external wall and the entranceway into, and once again you'll be able to see just how close the council tried to come and force him out, basically, by putting the fence more or less across his gate. And as you can see, there's absolutely nothing here today. There's no rubble as such. It just looks like a virgin field again. And it is quite boggy around this area. So I do wonder if the wells below us are still trying to do the job. But it would have been there just in front of you, by my estimations. As I say, I'll try and put screenshots in and marry it up. What we're having to use is these trees here, which have survived. But yeah, it's a real shame. Because when all's said and done, this was someone's home once. No, you just asked me something a minute ago. What was it? My memory's gone.
Oh, right. It was the nameplate. Was it Westwood number 1? It was
Yeah,
stuck on the door, weren't it?
yeah, there was.
James K. It'd be interesting.
Where that ended up.
Yeah, whether it was salvaged or it's under our feet somewhere, you know.
Well, when I came round, the area where it had been, it was gone.
It's completely clear.
Somebody had taken it. And what those plates were for, that was to mark the land for his drift man.
Right, okay.
They would know that was James K's land and not forgo it, basically.
Yeah, okay.
And I suppose it was a bit of a warning as well that there was a mining work going on there.
So if he's called it Westwood number 1, it begs the question whether there was a number 2.
Yeah.
Somewhere else.
I think the number, whoever issued out the permits or whatever, I think they gave you the number. So
right, okay. Yes, that was James's first venture, weren't it, into colliery ownership.
Yeah.
So he's had a little bit of a drift man here, and it's been short-lived. And then up at Welsh Whittle, Coppell area, he had Welsh Whittle and moved up there as well. So he had a bit more success before forming the Worthington Hall Canal Company or something along those lines at the back end of Standish as well. So this is where it all started. Yeah,
in this area. As I say, we're going to see where these people have been laid to rest further on in this video, but hard to imagine. It really is. You can still see there on that tree the scars from that fire. With it all being timber inside, it must have gone up. Really bad, that. I believe the roof collapsed in on it. And there was some really things in there from the 17th century, you know, the older crook, tarp.
We'll never know.
We'll never know, will we?
We'll never know.
Well, we'll take a look at what remains of the surrounding wall, because the public footpath used to run right at the side of this. And there's not really a lot to see, is there? It's quite sad.
Yeah, it was certainly on the screenshots that you're going to be putting in there. You can see how well maintained it was, and it's his own little world, weren't it? It
was.
A bonny stone wall going round, rectangular shape, and it just looked neat and tidy, didn't it?
Yeah.
And then, naturally the power station came along. That changed a lot of things. And
it did, but that was further back than that building.
It was, but if you lived in Kay's houses, it was on your doorstep. It was on your doorstep, weren't it? And Kay's houses, out of interest, were just over there.
Yeah, there was.
Built by Abraham and his sister Elizabeth.
There never seems to be any reason why they was built.
No, we're still trying to put our finger on it. I mean, we think the drift man came before the houses, and James had already uprooted to Coppell when he got married, and obviously got Welsh Whittle up there.
Yeah.
So he's finished his colliery concerns here. So I'm just wondering if it's Abraham and his sister just making a bit of money and taking some rent.
It could be.
Yeah, I'm not so sure about the quality of the land for farming or anything. It doesn't look up to much, or it looks more like a meadow rather than anything that you can use as a pasture or any sort of.
I've never heard of any stories of anybody actually farming the land. They've had cows on here apparently, and they've had horses on there, but they've never had farm as such. You never know, and then you believe there was a brickworks just above there.
Yeah, they were on the old map. Yeah, so it does mention that there was a brickworks just in the adjacent field to the.
Which would be beyond that tree line over there.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Right, we'll take a look at the front entrance and what remains of that, which is just down there. I believe that there's somebody actually living down there now. We'll see it. Somebody sleeping rough. There is a local gentleman called Wigan Kev. Have you ever heard of?
I haven't, I'm afraid.
Yeah, he's done a lot of living in here, and I believe he was also squatting in here when Carl Lewis had moved out and vacated it.
Yeah. The best than having nobody in, I suppose.
That
would be the argument.
Yeah. Right, we'll make our way down there now, Andy, and we'll see what we can see of the old walls. So Andy stood now where the original entranceway up to the house used to be.
Oh, yeah.
You can still see the step there, which looks to me, is it concrete, that one?
Yeah, it certainly is. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's been a later addition, but you can still see where somebody at some point has had some stones at the side, and you can just make out there where the track would have led up to. And then there used to be some beautiful gardens there, as I mentioned in my previous video, without sounding like I'm repeating myself. They used to get children from the local cares houses to come and mow the lawns for half an apple. Them were the days, eh?
Imagine trying to get a kid for half an apple now, eh?
Yeah. But you can see here where somebody's set up home a little bit. I don't think I'd fancy being there this time of year.
No, at least they've used timber.
Yeah. But yeah, this would have been the original entranceway. And you can see here just how close they came to the gateway there. That's ridiculous, that, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's a clear shot across your bows, that. Telling you we want you out.
Just the elevation. I mean, you know, it's just so tall, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
even if it could have been a compromise at some point and just work on the elevation or so. I don't know. I suppose it depends how they manufacture things on the inside and what space that they need. And
yeah, it certainly covers a big footprint. It swallows up where Westwood Power Station used to be, that. Although it's not as tall as Westwood Power Station was, obviously. Still, a telegraph pole hanging on there that would have sent the telephone lines into Westwood Hall. Surprised that's not been cut down. And the wall line rather, would have gone all the way along here. As you can see, anybody looking at this fence now, I bet they turn around and say, whoever put this in, they must have been drunk. But that'll be reason. I've no idea what will become of this land.
I think when you look on the maps, it's quite an unfortunate thing to say, but it does look primed for development in the way the new roads at Westwood, just adjacent here.
Yeah.
You know, where Whitall runs, just needs a leg off one of them, and you're into this section then. So yeah, I believe it is primed for development, and of course there were some surveys done not long after.
I believe so. Yes.
The hall was demolished properly as well, so there's something in the pipeline at some point, I think.
Now, if we go over into that corner there, you can see how they built the wall. The wall was built onto stones as well as bricks. So we'll have a little mosey over there. As I say, it's very difficult with this one because, sadly, there's not a lot here. So here's some of the original wall. They probably missed that bit because it's hidden behind that tree. But over the years, and I think you can just make it out there, you can just see the stones at the bottom there, for the brickwork. They would put stonework down first and then build bricks on top, and over the years it's just collapsed, as you can see. This is actually the original footpath that runs across Westwood. It was always in a bit of a valley, as I recall. I know Carl tried patching this wall up, but it would give the best of bricklayers nightmares, I should imagine. And that was his idea, Carl Ellis. He did do a lot of work, you know, inside, doing bits of patchwork.
Yeah.
And really, he shouldn't have been. When all said and done, it was a rented property. Council should have been doing it, but I thought his attitude was to stop council having any excuse for getting rid.
Yeah. So he was on his guard.
Did you ever meet Carl Ellis, or?
I didn't, unfortunately. No, I saw the newspaper report from 2014, possibly, with him stood at the door, and then everything else has just come from yourself and other people that knew him, you know, and what his intentions were.
As you can see there, those are original parts of the fencing. We're now in the field side, but that would have barred off the public footpath, and it wasn't that wide, that public footpath, looking at it, was it? Well, was it you said to me off camera, was it 3 foot they have to be across?
If it's a proper foot registered as in council right of way footpath, I understand that it's got to be a minimum of 3 feet. So it's not much. No, that's why some of them you can't pass another person, particularly where I live over the green belt between Beach Hill and Standish. So sometimes you just got to stand to one side. It's not wide enough. No, but this one here would have been very difficult. It did get difficult as that wall started collapsing. It was causing obstructions, and
nobody ever seemed to say to the McAvoys, you know, you need to sort your wall out. It was just sort of forgotten. But it would have led down there. You can see where the property, it would have gone on a corner just around there and then up to there where we've just been taking a look at. But that's about it, sadly, isn't it? That's all there is here now. Other than, there's still a little bit of something left behind by Carl Lillis, and we'll go and take a quick look at that, and then I think we need to wrap this portion of the video up because it's starting to rain, isn't it?
Aye, just a bit.
But it's just over there near them trees, so we'll take a quick look at that. And then I think we'll mosey on to the cemeteries and take a look where these people were laid to rest.
Sounds good to me.
So Andy, we're now at the sort of wooded area that used to be at the side of Carl's house, and this is where there's a little remnant left behind by him.
Right, okay.
It's not really a great thing for to look at, but it's there and it was built by Carl. It is.
Something out of nothing.
Well, it literally is something out of nothing because he built it out of the rubble from the old Kay's houses.
Oh, all right, okay.
When they demolished them, so
we've got some remnants from Kay's houses then.
It's certainly been there since 1984 because they demolished them in 1984. So I'll whip the camera off and we'll go into this wooded area and take a quick look.
Excellent.
So it should just be through here. Do a little bit of duck and cover. And he built himself a little bit of a pond. He managed to get one of those deep baths, corner baths, and he fashioned this here. All these stones that you can see, they were built up around it like a wall. And he got one or two fancy pieces, you know, corbel pieces.
That's that fiberglass, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, he built himself a little fish pond. Whether or not he'd ever had any fish in it, I don't know. And his house was just over there. Well, this is all that really remains of anything that Carl's done. And it's a shame because he really did love this place.
He'd have died of a broken heart, wouldn't he? Pretty much.
Yeah.
You know, it's a shame. He's trying to keep an historic building intact that has been passed somehow, landed in his hands. You know, so it's
and it's testament to him.
Yeah.
He could quite easily, it must have been harsh living over here, and remember, he was still living with old dodgy electrics and things like that.
Yeah, sure.
It would have been very easy, especially after his mother had passed away. I think she passed away in the 90s, for him to just say, you know what, remaining of my time, I'm seeing it out in a nice bungalow.
Right.
And council would have probably snatched his hand off.
Yeah.
They'd have probably given him whatever he demanded.
Absolutely, they would have, yeah. So am I right in thinking that Carl's mother was the housekeeper here?
She was, yes.
And that's the involvement, just for the view. Right, okay.
So what happened was, when Mrs. McAvoy passed away, and the council took ownership of the building, they ended up with sitting tenants. And his argument was that his mother then was, when all this battle started, she was in her 80s, and he said it'll kill her, basically.
Yeah.
And the council sort of tried putting it that way, well, it'll be better for your mother, Mr. Lillis, etc., etc., and he just wouldn't move. He said, this has been our home since 1971, this is where she wants to spend.
Yeah.
Rest
So
of the
you
days.
said Mrs. McAvoy, Elizabeth Kay?
Yeah.
Ah, gotcha.
To me, she's always Mrs. McAvoy because that's how we knew her as.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
But yeah, this is all that remains of Carl's involvement, really. And I've no idea where Carl's been laid to rest. No idea at all. If anybody does know that, please leave a comment below, as I'd like to go there and pay my respects. Yeah, this rubble here, that's from the old Kay's houses. And you can see where people have slowly but surely, just there in the distance, started fly tipping on this land. It's prime for it, isn't it?
Yeah. There's no barriers anywhere, is there?
There's not. And this is the other side of that tree that took the brunt of the fire. I wonder if these will survive, Andy.
I don't imagine much will survive if any development comes along,
No.
It's just going to all get cleared out. And with all due respect to the trees, they're not spectacular or, tree preservation order stuff.
No,
I don't think so.
I don't think so.
No,
I mean, this is impressive in summer, in bloom. But as you say, for being something that's preserved or a preservation order, it's not.
No, it's not.
Right, I think we'll now get out of this little area and we'll do a little piece to camera and then we'll move off to the cemeteries here.
Sounds good.
Right, Andy, I think we'll get back to the old jalopy, have a bit of a warm, and we'll make our way to where the Kays are laid to rest. But the story, oddly enough, is over in Chorley. That's where the first occupants, James Solomon Kay, he's been laid to rest. And thankfully, I know exactly where.
Oh, good.
That'll save us a bit of time,
It
that.
certainly will.
So we're going to leave a wet and windy Westwood Hall behind and join us again when we get to Adlington. And as if by magic, here we are in Adlington. Now behind me is the grave of the gentleman where the story really started with Westwood Hall. James Solomon Kay, is it?
Right.
So I'm going to now hand over to Andy, and he knows a bit more about this than I do. So over to you, Andy.
Well, I think James Kay's come from Westwood Hall. He's done all right for himself, according to my research. He's a colliery proprietor. Went straight into coal mining interests, which was the strong point of the time. If you had a bit of land, especially, you could make a little bit of money out of it. So the lad done well. He was brought up at Little Westwood Hall in Ince. Married Elizabeth Richardson at Manchester Cathedral, and settled in Coppell at Rose Cottage. So the guy, he done quite well. And in the meantime, it was his brother and his sister that continued to live at Westwood Hall and farm a bit of land there and also build some houses as well. But here we can see the burial place here in Adlington, and here's the headstones of James Solomon Kay, his wife Elizabeth, and her sister Sarah Richardson. And it's quite an interesting headstone to see that the description of his wife is she did her best. So it does make you wonder what exactly he meant by that. Was she a disappointment? I don't know. It's just, I suppose it's standards of the time. What do you think, Mr. H? Have you?
Well, Matt, I have a theory that perhaps Elizabeth may not have had the mental capacity to continue running a business. Remember, we're talking Victorian era where it was a man's world. It really was back then. And if he didn't feel she was strong enough, perhaps he thought it would be better being handed over to his brother.
Well, then again, how many families would the same situation have been where maybe the wife wasn't really up to the standard of the business, but how many headstones makes that sort of comment or suggestion on it? You know,
no, it doesn't. It doesn't. It is an interesting one.
It's open-ended, isn't it? Really?
And what I do find interesting is how it went over to his brother when his wife and his child was still here. That is an interesting. Interesting point. Whether or not we don't know. You've not been able to find anything regarding wills or anything, have you?
Not particularly. Usually, I mean, when I've studied other families and stuff, it usually went male to male or brother to brother.
That was just the thing.
Thing of the time. Just business and their standard and how they felt it should be. They didn't. To be honest with you, they weren't rich by any stretch. But like I said, they just done all right. They done all right. So they had there's two daughters and they had a young son who unfortunately passed away at the age of 4. But the two daughters did actually marry, and the headstone next to it is one of those daughters.
So we'll take a closer look at the inscriptions on these two graves. I don't know how well you'll be able to see, but what is interesting with James Solomon Kay is that statement there underneath of Westwood Hall near Wigan. And according to Andy, that's a sort of title. Am I right with that?
Oh, yeah. It made him more of a gentleman than the average person.
Yeah, here's all the people that are buried, and you can see there where she did her best. It is an interesting one, that. And then here's the Whittams.
So I believe after Alfred went, or maybe during his time, they settled in Stockport. So they moved away and just went a different direction, really. None of them continued in the Kay occupations, if you like, of farming and colliery ownership.
They certainly got around as a family, didn't they?
Oh, yeah.
So they're buried in the same plot.
Yeah, looks like the same plot. Yeah, so it's James obviously has been buried first, and everybody else, and then later on, I mean, this Sarah who married Alfred Whittam, this surgeon, would settle elsewhere in the country, but yet upon death, would find a place back with the family again.
Well, that's interesting as well. Just above the Sarah Whittam one is erected by Sarah Whittam.
Mm.
So whether or not she's had both these stones,
yeah, she's dealt with the burials and stuff like that.
Well, they've done really well. They've come from being just normal Joes like myself, and
yeah,
to becoming surgeons. So really, they started climbing the ladder.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. The social ladder. These people. I mean, you think, well, where did they come from? The earliest reference I've found of James was his parents came from the Woodhouses area.
All right.
Which, if people know about the Woodhouses, or it's said, if you imagine where Lidl is on Woodhouse Lane and all the area was called Upper and Lower Woodhouse, it is said that the plague victims were housed in temporary wooden houses.
Yeah.
But then again, I'd have thought at that period in history, a lot of the properties would have been wooden. Yeah. So I'm not too sure, but it's been passed down in that way. So of the Woodhouses, so they come from farming stock basically. So like I said, James Solomon straight into the life as a colliery proprietor. The rest of the family just continued with the farming interests.
Certainly, they've come from humble beginnings. Anyway, we'll magically move back to Wigan, and the story really gets interesting then, doesn't it, with his brother?
Oh,
how he ended up. Yeah. And certainly, perhaps this man's wife wasn't very apt at running a business, as we'll find out. The next person to reside at Westwood Hall, his wife certainly was. Anyway, as if by magic, we'll return back to Wigan. So, we're now back in Wigan, a rather chilly Wigan, Andy. It's rather cold today.
It's a bit nippy.
And we're now at the grave of the second occupants that we'll be talking about of Westwood Hall. And this is a rather colourful story, isn't it?
Oh, very, very colourful indeed. So what we're dealing with, or who we've got here, we went to Adlington, we talked about James and his marriage to Elizabeth Richardson, but we've got this surviving sister, Elizabeth, and Abraham, the brother. Now, the brother actually became a boat builder, whilst Elizabeth sort of managed the land. The people responsible for Kay's houses were the brother and sister, Elizabeth and Abraham. Now, unfortunately, Elizabeth would pass away aged 70 in 1891, which left Westwood in the hands of Abraham. So Abraham pretty much needed to do something about it. This guy was in his 70s when he met a young Anna Kearsley, aged 23, of Owen's Farm in Hinley, and produced one daughter, and that's another Elizabeth as well. So as time's gone on, the daughter's lost Abraham and the mum and Annie and stuff, and she's met a local butcher, which Wiganers will be very, very aware of McAvoy's Butchers, who started out at number 91 Scholes, and then I think it's something like 1918 or maybe 1920, there's a register showing Mr. Edward McAvoy, getting a stall at the Old Wigan Market. So they had one in Scholes. They might have kept one as a satellite, or they might have just moved everything to Wigan Market. I'm not entirely sure. But there are family trees out there on these McAvoys. But what seems to have slipped through the net is one of the butchers, this William McAvoy, married Elizabeth Kay. So she wasn't on her own for all that long. So they would. She basically married the butcher, this William McAvoy. Now, in the meantime, the marriage didn't last very long. I think it was 10 or 12 years maybe, which left Elizabeth at Westwood all alone up until her own death in about, was it like 1988, I believe, or something? Yeah, and she employed a housekeeper at the time, and that's where the bigger story of the last occupant of the house being Carl Lillis and all the problems and of potential development all arose from.
He certainly held up the council.
Oh,
he did. He held up.
He gave him a good fight. Yeah, he certainly did. But
this story is more fascinating than the James Solomon one. For me, to father a child at 70, marry a young woman, and then what you've got to remember is that Annie Kay, she became then, she was in a man's world, and I am sure that there were gentlemen who thought, I can take advantage of her. business-wise, etc. But from all accounts, people I've spoken to who lived in the Cares houses, she was a very formidable woman. I mentioned this in my previous videos. She was business-minded, she was astute. A daughter, not so.
Right.
And that's why I always have this image in my head of Mrs. Havisham from Great Expectations. But she didn't get married, and this is an interesting thing, until her mother had died. I think her mother died in 1944. So whether or not she always wanted to marry William McAvoy and her mother forbid it, we don't know. Or whether or not it was simply a case of loneliness.
Possibly.
But yes, very, very interesting. And I often wonder if it was a little caveat in the will that Abraham had to produce her, which would have been pretty rough as he was 70. He must have felt the pressure. But unfortunately, his daughter never knew her dad. He died when she was 3.
Yeah, so. It is an interesting story, and I would back you up on that one in saying that, you know, the estate, the legacy, if you like. I mean, they've been at Westwood since at least 1841. Yes. Yeah. So he's probably thinking to himself, I'm going to have to pass this down and hand this over here. It's going to be lost in the ether and as such, you know. So it's quite a bold move. I mean, she's 23. She's not 30 or 35, where she could still be of childbearing age. She's in her early 20s and she's a farm girl, you know. So
think of the scandal.
Yeah.
Back then, Victorian era. A man in his 70s dating this slip of a young thing, as it will be seen. Yeah. There must have been a lot of tongues wagging.
Yeah, I think there'd be more tongues if it happened now than probably back then.
I don't know. You know, it really was. The Victorian era was very stiff upper lippish. But
yeah. And to be in being he's essentially a landowner as well as being his boat builder with the advent of Cares houses as well. And I think they potentially also ran a brickworks on the site as well. So they're into a bit of everything really. You know, whilst the brother settled elsewhere, these guys continued at Westwood up and until
something
the end.
else. I don't know if you know this or not, but back then and I know we were talking 1900s, but it was the back end of the Victorian era. Those way of thinking was still there. If a woman lost her husband, she was expected to mourn for 10 years, not look at another man. And start off in the black, and then it would go to grey, and eventually she was seen as you can remarry. A man, it was 2 years. That's just how it was. So she was in her 20s. By the time she was out of mourning, she'd be in her 30s. By then you would be seen as an old maid. I don't want to touch that.
Yeah.
She wouldn't be seen as marrying material. So she, more or less, by marrying Abraham and knew of his age, he wasn't going to go on forever. She sort of, that was the end of her life, if you like.
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, she had the daughter, didn't she, as well? So it was just her and the daughter until Annie passes away, and then Elizabeth thinks, well, I'm on my own here. I probably want to do something about this. And then we believe this William McAvoy was actually delivering meat to the hall.
That's the story I've heard.
We think, that's an interesting way to meet, I think.
So whether or not Annie Kay approved of the courtship or not, we'll never know.
We'll never know.
But yeah,
Annie can't say too much, can she? No. Looking at the age that she was at. So,
but I did hear that she was a very formidable woman, business-wise. You didn't cross her. That was one thing.
Yeah.
And I did hear a story from one gentleman. He said that when she passed away, Annie, they was all expected to go up to the big house, as it was called, and pay the respects, although she was just the landlord.
Yeah.
And they went in this room, and she was laid out there. It was wartime, so it was blackout. It was just candlelight up there. And these was men in their 18 years of age, 20. They was terrified of her, even though she was just laid there. Not because she'd passed away, just because they expected her jumping up and giving them a rollicking.
Yeah.
That's how formidable she was.
Yeah.
Must have been a very hard act to follow for Elizabeth McAvoy after her mother.
Yeah, you could say that, I suppose. Yeah. So we're looking at 1841 till 1988, having Cays at Westwood, and it's still a bit of a work in progress as well for the viewers. Trying to figure out why the Walmsleys, who were the majority landowners at Westwood, sold this small parcel of land to the Cays, which became Cays Field. So that's ongoing. I'm still trying to figure out why they would do that.
But the Walmsleys are also buried here in the same cemetery at Ince. As the Cays.
I do like. It's one of my favourite cemeteries. If you
can have a favourite.
If you can have a favourite cemetery, because again, you got people who done well farming stock next to average people, and you've got major landowners like the Walmsleys and the Knowles and everybody else who may well be buried here. You know, we're all the same at the end of the day when we've gone. You know, it's
as the famous saying once said: "When the game is over, the Queen and the Pawn go back in the same
That's
box.
it, exactly.
Very true.
Yeah.
Right then, I think we'll take a closer look at the headstone because unfortunately with weather, it is rather grubby, isn't it, unfortunately?
No, you have to get in there a bit.
And then we'll wrap this one up, I think. And we'll just take a closer look at this grave. It really is interesting that this, I think, the headstone was added later. Would you agree with me on that?
Oh,
one?
absolutely, yeah.
But you look at this here, this slab, you can see where there's been sockets in it. And there would have been railings around this at one time. Probably removed, like Andy said, for the war effort. We'll go and have a look at the inscriptions. As I say, unfortunately, time hasn't been kind to this one. And I'll have to do what I don't like doing, which is walking on a grave. Well, there we go. As I said to you off camera, Andy, this must be a little bit strange actually coming here and visiting these people.
Oh, yeah, yeah. You spend a good few hours every evening researching, getting it all together.
Yeah.
And then you come and see, you know, where the story ends, really. I've done the start of the story, and this is the very end.
Those are the original inscriptions. I think
Yeah.
they was here before this headstone, and I'll show you why in a minute. And this is Abraham.
Then again, Elizabeth K is 1891, Abrams 1904, which is odd. Like you say, oh no, I can see what you
That's
mean.
the original one, isn't
yeah,
it?
Yeah, I can see. Yeah.
I thought that did confuse me because usually the man
penny's
would be
just
buried
dropped.
on that side.
Yeah.
But the reason I think that this is a later addition, this headstone, you can just make out the inscription of Westwood Hall. Once again, that was a very powerful thing to put on your headstone. It sort of showed your status.
And notwithstanding as well, when you say when someone hears the term Westwood Hall, I think, oh, that sounds bonny.
Yeah.
It was literally a small holding on a part of a bigger estate, you know, and it was. It's had other names as well, Little Westwood.
Yeah.
You know, it's.
Yeah, this is where the story ends, and this is the lost family, I would say, along with the Walmsleys of Wigan. You know, they had quite a bit of money, and to say that they came from humble beginnings, they did well for themselves. Right, I think we'll whip the camera around and wrap this one up. Right then, Hot Potters, there we go. That brings us to the end of this film. I hope you found it interesting. It is the final chapter for myself in doing this little project of Westwood Hall. Big thank you to Andy Lomax for all his information. As I say, he's gone on the websites and all that, and he knows his stuff really. But do check out his website. I'll put a link into the description below. So all that's left for me to say is, until the next time, from myself, Mr. H, and Mr. Lomax here, it is bye-bye for now.